Most big houses were specifically designed to keep the masters and their servants apart. One of the best examples of this idea of separation is Petworth. Its Sussex estate was 15 times larger than Erddig, and at its height it employed 300 indoor and outdoor staff. Most of the indoor staff lived and worked in a separate servants' wing at the back of the main house, but that wasn't enough. In order to keep the servants actually hidden from their employers and guests, the architect designed a tunnel which connects the servants' wing to the main house. Low-ceilinged and damp, you can just imagine what it was like with dozens of servants brushing past each other, carrying trays of food and dirty dishes. You can think of the country house rather like a giant swan, gliding gracefully on the surface, but underneath there's an army of servants paddling furiously to keep the whole thing moving. It tells us a lot about the reality of servants' lives. Most big employers didn't know their servants by name. Some didn't know how many they had. In one house in Suffolk, if a junior member of staff came into contact with a member of the family, they actually had to flatten themselves against the wall. Anonymity and invisibility were a very big part of the job. As if a tunnel wasn't enough, the main house itself was designed for invisibility, with its hidden passages, secret doors and backstairs, allowing the servants to shadow their employers' every move. From here, a hidden army could service their masters' needs with invisible hands, turning up beds, lighting fires, filling their baths and jugs with water brought up from the range. Scuff marks of slop buckets. The contrast between the sumptuous, richly decorated family areas and the dull-coloured servant quarters is stark. The very top floor of the house wasn't only designed to keep servants away from their employers, it was also built to keep servants separate from each other. Up here in the attic is where the senior servants slept, the butler, the housekeeper, the valet, the ladies' maids. The lower servants slept in dormitories above the servants' wing, men up one end, women down the other, separated by a locked door. In fact, I think you've got to think of this house as a physical embodiment of 19th century values with separation and segregation at its heart. It's segregation by sex, by skill, by age, and of course, in a house like this, by class. Here, in Petworth's vast private archive, with records dating back 700 years, we see what this segregation actually meant for the servants. A huge difference in pay between the highest and the lowest.
Which is quite fun.
Yes. Here we've got payments for servants and servants' wages.
And these are the servants in 1860.
Yeah.
They more or less go in hierarchical order. We're starting with Henry Upton, who was the surveyor.
£50 a quarter is roughly £14,500 a year today. He is by far the highest earner.
And so we go on down through the housemaids, the kitchen maids, and probably somewhere at the bottom, though they don't tell us, are the laundry maids. People like Christine Anderson, who only gets 3 guineas a year.
Just £700 a year in today's money. Though you have to remember that the staff here were fed, provided with uniforms, and lived rent-free. Surprisingly, in spite of the master-servant segregation, the archives have a very rare book, an informal photo album compiled by the master's daughter-in-law. All the dear servants at Petworth, 1860.
Yes, this was collected by Mrs. Percy Wyndham. She'd had photographs taken of all her favourite servants here.
Regardless of the house design, Mrs. Wyndham clearly got to know the servants and wrote affectionate notes, giving us tiny hints of their lives.
And this is Thomas, who was maid to Mrs. Percy Wyndham, who married Owen, the valet.
Thomas is presumably her surname?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. This is dear old Bowler, the nursemaid. A butler, or under butler, name forgot.
Name forgot.
Would have Petworth, but not for very long.
Still got a photograph, though.
Yes. There's Mr Upton, the Clerk of Works, who we know got £50 a year from the wage book. A dairymaid, Mrs Greenfield. A laundry maid, Reynolds, who's John Dine, who's butler for a long time. They didn't really want him to be butler. They didn't think he was quite up to it because he was so nervous.
Oh dear.
And if you brought them a cup of coffee in the morning, his hand would shake so much that he wouldn't have much coffee left in the cup. But he stayed with them for years.
So they kept him on anyway?
Yes, yes.
It's quite tantalising because you get a sense of, you know, who they are from here, where they worked, what they looked like, but there's still so much more, I think.
Yes, you'd like to ask them what they thought of it.
Yes. The formal servant portraits in this album, most standing proud in their uniform, are very familiar to us. And yet, these uniforms were actually a Victorian invention. 100 years earlier, in the 18th century, servants had dressed much more individually. And this is a wonderful collection of portraits. They look like lords and ladies in the latest fashions. In fact, they're all servants. Up here is Mary Hayes, down here is Mary Wells. They're both housemaids. Look at them, beautifully dressed. Look at their bonnets and their beautiful lace collars. This is another lovely one. This is the housekeeper, Mrs Edwards, who looks more like Marie Antoinette in that powdered wig. The men servants also really well turned out. This is a lower groom, Francis Yates, but look at his orange silk waistcoat there. Up here we've got the gardener and his wife, beautiful bonnet and roses, beautiful silver buttons down his jacket. This is Stevens, who is a general manservant, but if we take him off the wall, have a look at the back, get some lovely detail on him. Stevens, alias Lumpy, the famous player at cricket. So I think he was the Duke's cricket coach, and no doubt about why he was hired. When you think about them as a group, what really comes across is their personality, individuality, with their own looks and style. The most fashionable couple of all, placed in the very centre, look like they are the master and mistress, but they too are servants. If you compare these 18th century portraits with 19th century photographs, there's one very clear difference: uniforms. This is a mid-19th century photograph of a servant staff at a country house, and they're all in uniforms, different uniforms for different ranks, for different purposes, very clear division of labour, very clear what people do, because you can read it from their dress. It's even more pronounced in this one. This group of maidservants from the early 20th century, they've not only got the same clothes, they've even got the same hair. This lovely roll at the front. Some can clearly carry it off better than others, I think. What is happening here? Clothing is serving a purpose. Clothing is denoting class. It's putting servants back in their place. It's almost like individual identities are being flattened to a type. And this even happened with names. Fancy or higher ranking names could be changed by employers to more suitable lower ranking names. So Florence could become Flo, Elizabeth could become Betty. In some houses, footmen were given the names Henry or William, regardless of what their actual names were. As the 19th century progressed, service became more sharply defined as a profession, with specific uniforms and dress codes, as well as particular rules and customs. Tracts and manuals spelt out these rules clearly. How to be a Victorian servant. This is a 19th century pamphlet. Very snappy title for servants. Hints to domestic servants, addressed more particularly to male and female servants connected with the nobility, gentry and clergy. And it's written by a butler in a gentleman's family, 1854. So note, he's not a master, he's a butler, and this is his view of how servants should behave. Page 74, cleanliness. The first thing I would recommend is cleanliness. No person will make a good servant who is not habitually clean, clean in person and in work. Nothing is more offensive to a lady or gentleman than to have a dirty, slovenly servant about them, male or female. Page 78. Be uniformly obedient to your masters. Page 81. A slothful servant is a wicked servant. Keep your master's secret. Never reveal what he intends should be private. Defend your master's honour and the honour of his house. Seize on every opportunity to promote their happiness, and especially by praying for the renewing grace of God.